Welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Imagine for a minute that an Indian national starts making threats to the United States. He threatens to assassinate US diplomats, threatens to bomb Capitol Hill and carry out acts of terror against the United States. How would India act against such a person? The answer is obvious. That person would be jailed immediately. Free speech cannot be used as an excuse to incite terror attacks against foreign countries, especially India's strategic partners. Now, India has a zero-tolerance policy against those inciting terror attacks. Yet, this is not what happens in the rest of the world, it seems. In fact, in recent months, the exact opposite has been happening in the United States. A terrorist has been carrying on a campaign of hatred against India and threatening Indian diplomats and even India's parliament. Gurpatwant Singh Pannun has threatened to assassinate Indian diplomats. He has named them and incited others to carry out these attacks. And there's a reason India must take such threats to its diplomats seriously, and we'll come to that later in the show. But for now, to discuss who's behind Gurpatwant Singh Pannun, to discuss this very interesting sequence of events in the last couple of months, joining me to discuss this very interesting sequence of events in the last few months is Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow ORF, and my colleague Aditya Kaul. Sushant, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thanks, Sandeep.
Sushant, does it strike you as very unusual how Gurpatwant Singh Pannun has been allowed to, openly preach hatred against India and incite terror attacks? I mean, what's at play here? Who's backing Gurpatwant Singh Pannun?
Yeah, Sandeep, clearly there's something not quite right about how this whole thing is playing out. I can understand, dissident groups, holding demonstrations against India. That's par for the course. That kind of stuff happens out here also. We'll have the Tibetans demonstrate or the Tamilians demonstrate if a Sri Lankan leader is coming, which is okay, right? But what is happening in Canada and the US, even the UK for that matter, Australia, in fact, all the Five Eyes, if you will, is something kind of extraordinary. Because this is not just an ordinary protest which is taking place. They are actually making these blood-curdling calls for assassinations. They are actually taking action. They are defiling Hindu temples. If that's not hate speech, what is? They are threatening Indian diplomats, and yet you see absolutely no action from the governments and the authorities in these countries. Can you imagine, Sandeep, you or Aditya or I making a threat to an American Airlines that we are going to bomb it? Even Absolutely. If you mention a bomb in a different context while sitting in an aircraft, you will be deboarded and probably subjected to FBI interrogation. But here is a guy who publicly comes and says that the lives of Sikhs are going to be under threat on the 19th of November if they board an Air India aircraft. Yeah. Now, one could have dismissed this as the ravings and rantings of a lunatic, which clearly this man is. He is a lunatic. But the problem out here is that the group with which this lunatic is attached and that entire bunch of guys have had a track record of blowing airlines out of the air, right? They have had a track record of assassinations, of mass murders, of the most heinous and unspeakable crimes. And yet, you see the Americans, the Canadians, forget it, they are Pakistan, right? But you see the Americans, for example, being very blasé about it. And that leads me to the only possible conclusion that this guy is a paid agent of the American intelligence services, that he is their cat's paw, that he is somebody who they use to queer the pitch for India, to create some trouble, to put some pressure. Otherwise, it makes absolutely no sense the kind of impunity this guy enjoys in the US, in the American system, that nobody has put a finger on him, nobody has booked him for hate crime, nobody has booked him for issuing these threats, open threats. and everybody is so bothered about protecting his life under some alleged plot which was being hatched to assassinate this guy. Frankly, if somebody was to assassinate this guy, they would, reduce the burden of the earth. But on some alleged plot, the Americans are going into a funk. And
Right.
yet, when it comes to taking action against this guy's utterances and his actions and his links with terrorists, gangsters, all kinds of other criminals, there's absolutely nothing happening. Leads you to ask a question: why?
Why, Aditya? Why are the Five Eyes blind to India's security concerns? And this is an issue that you've been following in the last couple of months. Why is it that he's able to preach this kind of hatred and incite attacks and publicize lists of diplomats with their names and addresses
and get away with it?
and get away with it? Exactly.
So clearly, Sandeep, this is nothing new. I mean, it has been reinvented in many ways in the last 2 years. But what we have witnessed is that over the last many decades, Khalistani groups have been using such tactics, particularly from US, Canada, UK and Australia.
Right.
But also, these countries, the Five Eyes Sushant mentioned, have been using this to extend their foreign policy goals against India, be it tactics or pressure tactics, be it strong arming India into some other, it could be defense deals, it could be anything else. But the point is that US, Canada in particular, has been doing this time and again. I mean, imagine the kind of threats that have been issued now.
Right.
Not just about blowing up Air India, and threats particularly issued to the Sikh community based in India and Canada. And then going on to the extent of saying that the 13th December, the day the Indian Parliament was also attacked many years back, would be the day that yet again they will blow up the Indian Parliament, they will take strong action. Now, also, I need to mention here is that Gurpatwant Singh Pannun does not have any kind of a following either in India or Canada. He has a few hundred people here and there, radicals amongst the Sikh community who are supporting him in Canada as well as in US. They had attacked the Indian consulates both in Canada and US. But down in ground in Punjab or in all across the other states, there's massively no following. The only one person, Malkeet Singh, who was arrested recently,
Right.
is an unemployed person from some interior village who he had called and told him that I'll pay you a few thousand rupees,
Right.
and you just need to actually paint graffitis across the national capital and a few other areas around the Indian Parliament. And that's what he did, and he was arrested. So it clearly signifies that there's no resonance of Khalistan in India. But continuously, the Pakistani deep state, along with the Canadian deep state, and perhaps now it's increasingly becoming clear that even the US, the CIA, the FBI have been using this, and perhaps their political masters are very much aware of the fact that Pannu is their own man and
Right.
they are using him against India.
Sushant, I mean, do you buy this thing that he's actually a lone wolf and he can't really influence actions in India? Possibly he could do that overseas.
No, I don't. I don't buy it, and I disagree with my friend Aditya out here. Simply because, look, number one, you don't need to have a mass movement in your favor to create murder and mayhem in India. Even during the worst days of the so-called Khalistan movement in Punjab, how many people actually supported these lowlifes? At the mass level, there was never any great support for them. Maybe some hotheads, yes, but not a lot of people. And yet, what we saw was that there was an incentivization which was done, and a lot of criminals and others got involved in this whole thing, and then they took on that, that bore that veil of religiosity and went about their grisly task. But having said that, something very strange is happening. And this is why I don't agree with what Aditya is saying. Even in the 70s and 80s, when this whole Khalistan thing started bubbling up, and by 80s it erupted, there were mistakes made within India, just as there are mistakes being made within India even today. And these are not mistakes of appeasement in many ways. But please look at how the SGPC and all these jathedars of the SGPC are responding to people who have been convicted of murder, people who've been convicted of assassination and who are on death row. Look at the kind of causes they espouse. Look at the kind of stuff that is being spoken about by these characters. number one. Number two, have you ever seen the SGPC or some of these other characters come out openly against people like Pannu and others? No, you will not. And there's a reason for that. What the Canadians and what perhaps even the Americans and maybe the Brits are the slimiest of the lot. What some of these guys might be doing, which is what they did in the 70s and 80s, they incentivized this whole terror networks. And the reason was, India was seen as being part of the Soviet camp, number one. Number two, the Soviet, in the 80s, it really took off because the Soviets had moved into Afghanistan. There was this great Afghan jihad being fought, which ultimately led to bringing down of the Twin Towers, but that's another story. And the Americans and all of these other characters thought that India could actually make life difficult for Pakistan. So why not embroil India in its own troubles? And that is when you'll suddenly see a massive spike in the terrorism in Punjab. So India is unsettled, and I think there were Pakistani generals who said that we've occupied 2 Indian divisions in Kashmir, another few Indian divisions in Punjab. India is not in a position to wage any war against us. So please look at the larger context in which this whole thing is happening, even today. The other thing is that I think what they are doing is, the numbers might be small, 100, 200,000, maybe 2,000 people who actually identify with these guys. But how many people were there, Sandeep, in Indian Mujahideen? I don't think more than 100. Do you remember what all mayhem they had wreaked, the amount of havoc they had wreaked in this country when they went on that bombing spree? You don't need a whole lot of people. And what do the Canadians do? They offer you the visa. They offer you asylum. That's the name of the game. And I think one of the best things the government of India has done is thrown out these 40-odd Canadian diplomats. And I think maybe we need to start doing something similar with maybe the Americans and others, because this is a non-negotiable thing. You cannot want a strategic relationship with India at one level and then undermine India's strategic stability at another level. India's domestic stability at another level. How does that play out? What kind of friendship, what kind of partnership are we talking about if you are deliberately undermining my own stability, my domestic stability? You are questioning my territorial integrity and unity. You are sowing divisions in my country, and then you say we are strategic partners.
So Aditya,
I can't understand this.
You had this thing of the US court accusing India of an Indian national of planning to kill Pannun. In the very same week that top US officials were here for a 2+2 dialogue. So do you think that this new case, this list of allegations that they've made that India has been trying to kill Pannun, that actually gives him a fresh lease of life to continue what he's doing?
Well, of course he does. He's been operating from New York for a very long time. In fact, he has a dual citizenship of both Canada and US. He frequents both the countries to instigate, these protests, violence in India. And apart from that, yes, US has been using this, as I said, as pressure tactics. We need to understand that this is an allegation that has been made. There's no strong evidence that the US anyways has. Some drug trafficker or an arms dealer somewhere, in Europe has been arrested, and allegedly he was in touch with some Indian agent. So they have some phone call that they have produced, but there's no chain. There's no, money chain or link that has come out. There's no, any other kind of evidence that has been presented by the US authorities. Ideally, this case should be over within the next 6 months and we'll know what happens to it. I'm sure that diplomatic dialogue would be on, strategic dialogue would be on between these partners. But at the same time, I think the US will have to reflect and see which way they won't, and they will continue to in fact use this as a bargaining chip with India as a pressure tactic.
So Sushant, we've been trying to get Pannun through Interpol, extradite him through Interpol, but every time we try and do that, Interpol says that he's a high-profile Sikh separatist, but his activities have a clear political dimension. How long, what do we have to really do to get Pannun back, extradite him, or make sure he kind of, shuts up?
What we need to do to make him shut up is basically tell the Americans to shut him up. And I think the Americans will have all the goods on him to shut him up. and others of his ilk. Uh, but the problem is that, organizations like Interpol and all, Sandeep, please, forget Pannu, forget all these other characters, right? Please tell me, who has Interpol ever extradited back to India? Yeah? I don't
Yeah.
remember. Kisko kiya? We've got people from the UAE and Saudi Arabia
Yes.
after their government started cooperating with us. Not
Right.
because of Interpol. Interpol is the most useless organization in the world.
It's the
It's
United
as
Nations.
useless as the United Nations.
That's right. I was just coming to that.
No, it's
Absolutely.
as useless as the United Nations. What has the United Nations ever solved? Except if you get a job in the UN, you should never reject it because it's fabulous. You roam around the world, you get a fabulous salary, no taxes, nothing. So it's a great job for people like Antonio Guterres or whatever that guy's name is. You can do all kinds of virtue signaling. You have no responsibility for anything. So it's a great life you have. But how does it affect anybody's life? Does the UN affect your and my life? It's a talking shop. They sit, they pass resolutions every day. Nobody listens to them anyways. So it's the same thing with Interpol. You made this nice fancy organization. Maybe some IPS officer will go on deputation out there. He'll have a good time for a couple of years. And that's it. Please tell me, how many people have they extradited to India? So, it's the breakdown of the international. The idea is very good of the United Nations, of the Interpol, but it's the breakdown of the system because the more powerful countries have always undermined these things and used them for their own ends. So, depending upon them, you're not going to get anything.
Yeah,
But I think you need to have a strong kind of engagement with the Americans and tell them that, look, this is what we know. And just as the Americans are open to, coming out and filing cases in courts on some unnamed person, CC1, CC2, CC3, we can also do the same thing. We can talk about American, agents who have been working out here, or Canadian agents, or diplomats who've
or
been
double
out here.
agents like David
Yeah,
Hidley.
double agents who've been hobnobbing out here.
Yeah.
यार इस देश में केस फाइल करने में क्या लगता है? मतलब कि anybody can file a FIR.
Right.
Today, what I'm saying, somebody can go and file an FIR against me in some obscure corner of this country.
Right.
I'll be running around to Manipur or Mizoram or some place trying to defend, protect myself. So FIRs can be filed anywhere, charge sheets can be filed anywhere, cases can be filed anywhere, and let's do it. This is a game two can play. The Pakistanis tried some other games, we reciprocated. Now they've kind of started shutting up. Right. So I think maybe even with these guys, we need to do this, that, if you try and spoil our reputation, we'll try and spoil yours.
Right. So
is this the way you want to build a strategic partnership? I don't think so.
So that's certainly not the way to build a strategic partnership. But Sushant, stay with us. We'll be talking about another long forgotten case that had hit a dead end for decades. When the issue of death threats against Indian diplomats began a few months back, we at News9 Plus started discussing the issue. And we remembered the only instance when an Indian diplomat was abducted and killed in cold blood by terrorists 40 years ago. Now, Ravindra Mhatre was kidnapped by Kashmiri terrorists in Birmingham in 1984. He was killed in cold blood. And 5 days later, India hanged Kashmiri separatist Maqbool Butt, whose release the terrorists had asked for. But the actual killers of Ravindra Mhatre were never discovered. And strangely, the government of India too forgot this case, and so did the United Kingdom, until Aditya Kaul, who's with me here today, decided to investigate. Now, joining us on the show is Ambassador Gurjit Singh, former envoy to Germany. Ambassador Singh, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you.
Ambassador Singh, Ravindra Mhatre was your instructor at the IFS Academy, and you knew him personally. How shocking was his killing in 1984?
In those days, there was no IFS Academy when I joined. We were sent to different sections to train. And he was in the passport and visa section, such a gentleman who would listen to us and, offer us very practical insights, which stood us very well. So when he was abducted, in those days, this is the pre-internet age. So the news would come to you rarely through a newspaper which came by the diplomatic bag. And when Ravindra Mhatre was abducted, there was a concern. But when he was assassinated, I think that time we were all deeply shocked. because A, it had never happened to an Indian diplomat, and B, it happened to such a gentle person, Ravinder Mhatre, in what was considered a very safe posting in Birmingham. So I think all these showed us that now nowhere was safe.
Aditya, tell us how you began this investigation and how, without revealing, of course, the murderer, but tell us this whole process for the last couple of months, how you went about this.
Well, it's been close to 4 months now, Sandeep, that we've been investigating this. And one thing very curious was that every year in Feb, I used to hear this name Ravindra Mhatre, at least for the last decade.
He died before you were born.
Yes, he actually died before I was born. But the fact is that I have been hearing this name time and again, but never did I realize that what were the facts of this case. I knew that some terrorists had killed him, abducted him. But it was only after I was interviewing a source, and during that interview, the conversation went to Mhatre's killing, and that source told me that, have you ever bothered to check about the killer? And that led me to investigate this case further. I spoke to a lot of other people in UK, in Pakistan, in Kashmir, in Netherlands, and finally I tracked down the killer. And this two-part documentary that we have made, Murder of an Indian Diplomat, not just reveals how the abduction happened, how the killing happened. We've recreated the entire sequence in UK. We've shot in United Kingdom, in Birmingham, as well as in London. And we also speak to the family members of Ravindra Mhatre, his daughter Asha, who was just 14 years old at that time. And interestingly, it was her birthday during that time. We also speak to, very importantly, two witnesses in this case, crucial witnesses. One of the witnesses is the man who was one of the co-founders of JKLF, and he reveals that in front of him, the killing was ordered. And the second witness is also a senior functionary of the JKLF, who actually reveals how not only Ravindra Mhatre, but two senior functionaries of Government of India, one a former Prime Minister and one top ambassador, were also supposedly, there was a conspiracy to kill them in UK and in France. So there are multiple revelations that are coming out in these multiple documentaries. But the question now is that tomorrow afternoon, that we reveal who killed Ravindra Mhatre and where he is hiding. Will the Government of India, and particularly will the Government of UK, the Rishi Sunak government, really put their act together and not just trace him, but ask that country to arrest him, extradite him, and bring to justice him immediately.
So, Sushant, it turns out that Ravindra Mhatre's killer is still alive and well, from what Aditya has found out, and he's in a country that you know absolutely nothing about, Pakistan. But does that surprise you?
Well, I was under the impression that his killer might be either in the UK or the US. No, it doesn't surprise me at all. Look, the fact of the matter remains that that entire killing and that entire incident was basically a Pakistani-inspired thing. That is the time they were trying to... Remember, that was also the time when this whole Khalistan nonsense had started in Punjab. And Punjab, there was a lot of ferment in Punjab, and the mid-80s was a very torrid time. Terrorism was running rampant in Punjab. There was all kinds of problems happening. And it is under that time that, they started making a push. So people, when they say that it was that rigged election in Kashmir and that is why everything went out of the... It's like the dumbing down of history of the worst kind. Because the plot to start agitating or do the kind of murder and mayhem in Kashmir, it started in around the early 80s. And this whole incident of the Mhatre killing was linked to what happened subsequently. So I'm not surprised that the guy actually went and is living in Pakistan, probably in comfort. Amanullah Khan, for example, I used to meet Amanullah Khan very often whenever I used to go to Pakistan. And frankly, there was a time when Amanullah Khan was very well to do. And towards the end of it, he had been dumped, and he used to live literally in poverty. He couldn't even afford to give you a cup of tea, even though he'd come to meet you. He was that badly off. But the point is that these were people who were then given refuge in Pakistan. They were never allowed to go out from Pakistan.
Yeah.
They were kept by the Pakistanis safe and secure. So if this particular guy whom you're talking about, I don't know who Aditya is talking about, but it doesn't come as a surprise at all. Not for a second does it come as a surprise. But look, here is also where the problem comes. It's the kind of license that these so-called Five Eyes have given to Pakistan.
Right.
That you can do what you want to do. There will never be any pressure on you. We will never force you to shuck up anybody. Let me just digress for a second. There is this Pakistani dissident. Now, India doesn't go after dissidents, right? Never has. But there is this Pakistani dissident who's basically a YouTuber and, comes on Twitter Spaces, abuses everybody, is that kind of a guy. The Pakistanis hatched a plot. The plot was hatched by the ISI. They paid a British Pakistani money to go and bump this guy off in Netherlands. The British intelligence got wind of it and they arrested this guy. The guy has been tried. He has been convicted. The Brits have not gone and come out openly against the Pakistani intelligence agencies which ordered this hit. Why? I think this is the question which needs to be asked.
Right.
Why are they not doing it? The reason is because all these guys then want to use the Pakistani dirty tricks department for their own ends. So the Pakistanis will give them some information about some terrorist plot which could be affecting them and stuff like that. So they don't want to rile the Pakistani intelligence agencies and they want to do business with it. The Americans, despite the fact that the ISI was responsible for the killing of thousands of Americans,
right,
the Americans will continue to sleep in bed with the Pakistanis and not have anything to say, to whatever has been done to them. That's the ugly world we live in. So when these guys start sermonizing to us, when they start hectoring us and telling us that we did not expect you to do this, what did you expect us to do? Turn the other cheek?
Ambassador Singh, we began investigating the story precisely because of all the threats against Indian diplomats in North America and in the UK. What do you think the government of India must do now? The Matre murder was something that was left as an unsolved, killing. While we might have got our revenge by hanging Maqbool, but 5 days later, the case was never really pursued. In the light of the new evidence that we've gathered, including, we've spoken to some very key people around that time who've actually confessed to us. What do you think the government of India must do now?
I have lived through rather difficult times in Sri Lanka. And I was also there in 1998 when the US embassy in Nairobi was bombed. And our embassy went under almost like collateral damage. Now, in such cases, retaliation is hardly the answer, particularly if a diplomat's life is lost. The Americans lost a huge amount of lives when their embassies in Lebanon and Nairobi were bombed, for instance, but their reactions were very different. Now, in the case of India, we have also unfortunately lost diplomats, 2 of them at the gate of our embassy in Kaul a few years ago. But the situations differ. What really happens is that the diplomatic route is blocked and a subterranean route takes over, very often due to a lack of intelligence or a breakdown of intelligence cooperation. Now, in many cases, people who are supposed to protect Indian interests, I think suddenly lose track of what is happening or about to harm them. Or sometimes the back channels just stop working. In my view, the moment back channels stop working, that is an alert and the system must respond. But I don't think the system works in a cohabitative manner. Now, when you talk about the breakdown of a strategic partnership, you will notice how differently India has reacted to Canada and the US.
Yes.
Right. Now, in the case of the people concerned, evidently, every Sikh killed in Canada is not the source of Canadian angst with India. it is only one Sikh killed who is the source of angst with India. So that means these people are agents of the establishment whose loss is or protection is considered important, but not the life of every PIO in their countries. Right. Now, somewhere there is a breakdown that they felt compelled to go with their local interest to the point that clear-cut attacks on Indian diplomats were ignored and condoned.
Right.
Now, this is a breakdown. Now, you can say we will do it in India and all that. You can do all that. But I think these are parallel tracks within a country's foreign policy which work. And if one of them breaks down, the other one needs to pull its weight. And how it pulls its weight is different.
Right. Aditya, interesting point that Ambassador Singh mentioned, how different our reactions were to Canada and then later to the United States. We've fully cooperated with the United States, but we haven't said the same, sent out the same message to Canada. Explain to us this difference in the way we've reacted to these two countries and how it's going to play out in the next couple of weeks.
Well, it's abundantly clear, Sandeep, that India's relationship with US is of paramount importance. The strategic partnership, not just in the time of Biden, but this goes far back. Particularly also, no matter if the Republicans are in power or the Democrats, we've had a very robust strategic partnership and now a 2+2 dialogue that recently concluded, a yearly dialogue that takes place in Washington DC as well as in New Delhi. So I think that's why India is treating this case very sensitively when it comes to US. With Canada, for a very long time, we have seen that politically, the political class of Canada has not shown the maturity to change its stance, to change its policy when it comes to the Khalistani terrorists. And now they are bearing the brunt of this. And India also realizes this, that Canada has been nurturing these snakes in the backyard who are going to harm them. And it's not just about the Khalistani terrorists, but we also see now that there are open gang wars that are happening on the Canadian soil. There are gangsters like Brar, who was responsible for the killing of Sidhu Moosewala, who's been staying there. There are many others. And there are open gang wars that are happening. There are openly terrorists who are learning to use the gun, the AK-47, on Canadian soil and preaching hatred against India and many other countries, and perhaps receiving money also from Pakistan and elsewhere. Right. So I think Canada perhaps is not as strong with India as the US is. So US relationship matters to India much more, and that's why India is delicately treating that. And I'm sure that in the back door at the level of the MEA and at the level of the National Security Council, there are multiple dialogues that are happening. You spoke about the visit of the FBI director for the first time in 12 years. And that's why US is trying to escalate this matter to another level, because as you know, the trial would be beginning soon, and perhaps in the next 3 to 7 months, the trial would be ending, and we'll know in which direction US will go in this particular case. But as of now, it seems that US is particularly trying to strong arm India at a time when India has gone all guns blazing against Canada.
Absolutely. And the killing of Ravindra Matre, in fact, is another reminder for us that death threats to Indian diplomats can never be taken lightly. And nations like India must have long memories, and the killers must be brought to book. Who killed Ravindra Matre? Download the News9 Plus app and watch our story, Murder of a Diplomat. I'd like to thank Ambassador Singh and my friend Sushant for joining us on the News9 Plus show. Home Minister Amit Shah said in Parliament that Pakistan-occupied Kashmir would still be part of mainland India had then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru not made two blunders. Watch our story, Nehru's Himalayan blunders, to know what they were.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny.
If Nehruji had treated Jammu and Kashmir like any other princely states of that time, then Kashmir would have been like any other state, peacefully, fully united.
After 70 years, you have nothing to do except to criticize Jawaharlal Nehru.
There was a dying need on the part of Mr. Nehru to emerge as an international statesman. And in the process, national interest was completely staked and compromised.
By debunking my facts and figures, they are actually disowning Nehruji.
Guyana is a small country in South America. It's roughly the size of Gujarat, but has the population of Ladakh. But this thinly populated country has something everyone in the world covets now: oil. Over the past decade, oil companies have discovered 11 billion barrels of oil and gas in Guyana. And this could explain why neighboring Venezuela has now laid claim to Guyana's oil-rich region, a place called Essequibo that accounts for almost 2/3 of Guyana's territory. I'll leave you with this interview of Ambassador R. Vishwanathan, an expert on South America, on whether Venezuela will invade Guyana and start a war. Thanks for watching.
Well, I want to make it very clear one thing. There is not going to be a shooting war. There is not going to be a battle. There is not going to be any escalation of the crisis beyond control. And there is not going to be any intensification of conflict which would go out of control. This is for sure. This is a narrow, small political show run by the president of Venezuela to divert the attention of the people who are suffering from political crisis, economic mismanagement and collapse of the economy, and the people are suffering. And the elections are going to come next year. So he needs to divert the attention of the people and unify the voters, create a kind of nationalistic fervor and patriotism for people to vote for him. That is one. And secondly, he might even use this as an excuse to postpone the elections, saying that this is an emergency, the sovereignty of the country is at stake. Because if a free and fair elections are held today in Venezuela, President Maduro will lose. And it is not just a electoral loss for him on the government leaders of the country, because if they lose the elections, if the opposition comes to power, all the top people of Venezuela who are running the armed forces, the government, the petroleum company, the electoral council, everyone will be either put in jail in America or they will be handed over to the International Criminal Court. So the top 100 people of Venezuela who run the country, they are in critical danger. They are afraid that if they lose the elections, if the opposition comes to power, they will lose their lives. So it is a big stake for them. And the United States is very eagerly and enthusiastically waiting for an opportunity for a regime change in Venezuela. And they have tried many times in the past. They tried a coup in 2002 against Chavez. And since then, there have been many covert attempts and overt attempts. The Venezuelans do not want to give an opportunity for United States to intervene. Now, there is also another factor. It's not just only the sovereign issue on the part of Venezuela. Brazil has a stake in that. You know, since the Venezuelan government is a leftist government, ideologically, President Lula has been supporting. In fact, the very survival of Chavez was to a large extent because of the support extended by President Lula at that time. Now, President Lula will not allow the government of Venezuela to escalate the crisis, which would attract the intervention of the United States, which would use the issue to either invade Venezuela, to bomb Caracas, or set up permanent base in Guyana, in the disputed region. And that is a danger not only for Venezuela, but for Brazil, because Brazil has a border with Venezuela. So the Brazilians, they do not want the American military presence in their neighborhood. So this is another layer of safety, that the crisis will not be allowed to go beyond control.